Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start from the top. Welcome back to Civic Engagement and Climate Justice, our 4-part webinar series. This is the final event, reflection and plan of action. So some expectations for behavior. 1, actively listen. Please take turns when talking and give space for others to have their time to talk. These are just general rules that I hope that everyone can follow. And I hope that people demonstrate this out in the community too, if you're watching this later on after this has been recorded. Rule number 2, recognize strength and diversity. So understand that each community member's strengths through their diverse experiences. And just a second, I have to mute. Okay. And 3, honor commonalities. So the ties that bind us are greater than the spaces that divide us, and we all have the same goal. So I'm going to give a brief presentation overview here. Number 1, I'm going to introduce myself. 2, we will go into a review of civic engagement, climate justice. 3, we will talk a little bit about climate justice and equity. 4, I will talk about direct service, and then philanthropy, advocacy, and then finally it'll be your turn to reflect, and then we will talk about creating a plan of action within your community. And then finally, I have some nonprofit opportunities for you to volunteer with that I will mention after this. So again, welcome everyone. My name is Abby. I'm your facilitator, and I don't like to say that I'm the instructor because I like to facilitate and encourage everyone to engage during these webinars. A little bit about me is that I am from Michigan, and I have lived between both peninsulas of Michigan, Upper and Lower Peninsula, and I have on the top a photo of where half my family comes from, the barge and the Upper Peninsula with all the leaves, and then below that, Grand Haven, Michigan, and I'm from the shores of Lake Michigan. So I moved to Denver for Colorado, and to Denver, Colorado for grad school, and I have seen a lot of issues with water and the drought out west, and being from pretty much the Great Lakes state, it has really drawn me to volunteer. In regards to the communities that I come from, other than the fact that I'm from Michigan and now live in Denver, I do have some Sami indigenous heritage. Sami people are reindeer herders who live in the northern reaches of the Scandinavian peninsula, and they're drastically being affected by climate change, and their way of life is being threatened every day. So climate justice, that brings me to why I volunteer for it, and part of it has to do with my heritage, and it also has to do with me being an outdoors woman, and seeing the drought out west has really impacted my perception of water. And I mean, it's just been such an easy resource in Michigan, and to see how it affects people out west has really impacted how I view climate justice. So a brief review. Civic engagement. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit into defining civic engagement, and I kind of have a long definition here, but I really like this. And it was from a book called Civic Responsibility in Higher Education by Thomas Ulrich. Civic engagement is a morally and civically responsible individual, recognizes himself or herself as a member of a larger social fabric, and therefore considers social problems to be at least partly his or her own. Such an individual is willing to see the moral and civic dimensions of issues, to make and justify informed moral and civic judgments, and to take action when appropriate. So in simpler terms, civic engagement is active participation of citizens within their community to address public concerns that they have. In regards to climate change is not equitable. it affects everybody. And unfortunately, it affects a lot more social groups than we like to think in a myriad of ways. So low income and historically underrepresented groups not only feel the effects of climate change first, they also suffer the greatest. I have several images here, and I think that I shared this in the first webinar slides that I have, but I want to review them. And over on the left side, I have an overview of a barrier island with rental properties or just properties that are second homes for people, and they've been wiped out by a hurricane. And usually wealthier people own these properties in the Outer Banks. And I want to draw attention to the fact that this doesn't just affect people living in poverty and who cannot escape hurricanes. It affects everyone and wipes out homes. The second image that I have is of survivors of Hurricane Katrina, and they're waving at this helicopter, which I suspect might be a FEMA helicopter, and they clearly have been waiting for help and long enough to have spray painted help onto the cement, and they're waving an American flag. And I can only imagine the pain and the irony of someone taking a photo of them from the helicopter, if this was a governmental helicopter, and they're waving an American flag asking for them to help them. This third image that I have is of a rice farmer looking out on their field, and I mean, the field is basically now just a desert because of the climate change that's happened in their area. Finally, I have an image of a disabled woman sitting in a wheelchair, and I know a lot of people don't necessarily think of people with disabilities being affected as much when it comes to climate change, but I want to, especially because we live in Colorado, talk about how people with disabilities like MS, and Colorado happens to be one of the states with the highest amount of people who have MS, they actually cannot really tolerate heat. And unfortunately, some projections by the World Health Organization have said that there will be an increase of 250,000 annual deaths per year globally due to heat intolerance. This is why climate change and climate justice is not just an environmental issue, but also a human rights issue. And that brings us to why climate change is not equitable. Although we are all affected by climate change, there is a wide range of disparities between different social groups, including, but not limited to, socioeconomic class, race, gender identity, sexual orientation, and ability status. And I have this image of a world made out of, it's like word cloud. And I do have this PowerPoint available, and we will be posting it up online, but I want to just, have you kind of pause and reflect on all of these terms that we have for differences in society, and yet we're all fighting the same thing in terms of climate change. However, the stratification we have because of the socioeconomic issues and class issues really creates many problems. In review, we're going to go over Pillar 1. So Pillar 1 is direct service. And just a definition, direct service is the short or long-term donation of time and talent to directly support social change activities of a community-based organization. And I have that from the University of Chicago. Some examples of direct service are regularly attending local nonprofit meetings. So if you volunteer, I really want you to think about how often you might donate your time as a volunteer. It's really important that we have people volunteering in our communities, but what's even more important is that we have people regularly attending as volunteers to community meetings, because there's a relationship and people start to trust you, and they start to trust you as a person who knows more about climate change, and they can understand you are a go-to person for an organization or a group of people that knows more and advocates more for climate action. A second thing that I have in regards to volunteering is, who do you show up for? So I talked a little bit about how I am of Sami descent, and I clearly show up for people in my family who are of Sami heritage, and even Sami Americans who live in the northern reaches of the Midwest. And climate change is really affecting our way of life. I mean, even down to just how we live our lives daily. I mean, it's really played a huge effect on people of my culture. And I want you to think about that too, because the more that you think about your own story, the more that you can share it, and the more that you can relate to other people and tell them why you show up for climate justice and encourage them to open up themselves. And I have a bullet point that says your communities, and I know that kind of sounds redundant because I just talked about how one of my communities is Sami. But when I'm talking about your communities, think about the communities you live in or the communities that you work in, which could be different than the one where you live. Think about, maybe if you do have a second home in the mountains and you want to advocate for that area where your second home is. Think about all of these things and where you could be active in Colorado or wherever you are in order to take action. I have also a couple of social justice examples, because I know that we talked about earlier how climate justice and social justice are not mutually exclusive. And there are a huge variety of organizations that you can volunteer with. And that's, again, at the end of this slideshow. But there's enough so that you can almost kind of relate to your own story and think about where you come from and why you are participating in climate justice, and relate it back to yourself. So, say you know someone who is American or Native American, and you want to advocate more for your friend who's Native American and participate and support and be an ally. You could join a nonprofit that thinks about the intersectionality of native tribal rights and climate justice. Or maybe you have someone in your family who has MS, and you could also have someone who is suffering from respiratory issues related to fracking. So think about healthcare accessibility in fracking and how that ties in with climate justice. There are a lot of organizations in Colorado working on these issues. And I want you to stay true to yourself, because then you have an even more powerful message and something that you can contribute to the force that is climate action. And again, time for questions will kind of be after the next couple of slides. So I apologize if you have questions right now. The second slide focuses on pillar 2, which is philanthropy. Philanthropy is defined as voluntary action for the public good. And I have that from Peyton and Moody. And that was one of my favorite ideas of what philanthropy is. And I think a lot of people resort to thinking that philanthropy is donating money, but I think it is actually so much more than that. I think that philanthropy is, and as I say in the slide, as a concept and a practice, it has many different definitions. It has also been defined as the practice of individuals reflecting a love of humanity to benefit all. And I have a picture of people in a circle with recycling shirts on. And in terms of donation, it doesn't have to be money. It can be your time. It can be your story. It can be, fundraising with friends in the community, and also working on ballot initiatives. It can be a lot of different things. It can be educating other people. It doesn't just have to be donations that you make to a nonprofit, because it means actively advocating in a way for climate justice that's going to make an impact. And you can donate so much more than just money. In other words, philanthropy means community beneficence. It means working together towards, a common goal. And in this case, we're working towards fighting climate change. And that brings us to pillar 3, advocacy. According to the Oxford Dictionary, advocacy is public support for or recommendation of a particular cause or policy. Advocacy is not just a means to support a cause, but also to educate other community members about a specific cause. So I like to think that advocacy is almost kind of synonymous with education, or it goes hand in hand with it. And advocacy doesn't mean just educating your elected officials about climate justice or climate change or issues that you are interested in. Advocacy means opening up the talk in your community, talking to family members, talking to friends, talking to your neighbor, asking them if they know about a certain issue. I think a lot of times people think of advocacy as, spearheading, and, there's this image of the fist and like, let's, fight for what's right. But you cannot fight people who don't understand if you don't try to educate them on something. And I have this image of 2 soccer teams, and they are walking in opposing directions, but they're high-fiving each other after a soccer game. And this was something that I used to do when I was really young. And I was required to, along with my team and the other teams in our league, high-five one another, even if we lost. And this was like, the big rival team in the league, and tell each other, good game. And I really want to make sure that participants of this webinar realize that advocacy is not fighting others. It does not mean fighting elected officials. It does not mean fighting other people. It means fighting concepts. And the way that you can fight concepts is by educating others and writing to your elected officials and telling people the facts, because if you have objective facts and research, it doesn't mean that you have to openly fight someone in order to get somewhere. So this part is where we are going to reflect, and this is an image of an Inuit in Greenland, I believe, looking out and in his own way reflecting in more ways than one. And he clearly is standing on a melting ice sheet and just kind of looking out at the place where, he calls home. And so I'm going to unmute everybody here. Okay. So now it's time for us to reflect, share, and brainstorm. And I have first set of questions. Now it's your turn, reflect and share. And I'm going to read these questions, and I know you can see them, but I kind of want you to just kind of think about your responses to them, and hopefully both of you can kind of reflect on this. So the first question is, who do you show up for? Meaning, what groups or communities do you represent? And again, I gave my own example with Michigan and Denver, and then I'm of Sami heritage. My second question I have is, which pillar out of direct service, philanthropy, and advocacy most inspires you to take part in climate justice? My third question is, what limits you from engaging in climate justice? So I want you to think about, if you have a very busy work schedule and you're limited by a 40-hour work week, 9 to 5, or if you have a family and you have little kids and your time is taken up, participating in these things, or maybe both. What limits you from engaging in climate justice, but how can you also work around that? So my final question addresses that. What ways are you able to access opportunities for climate justice? And that's within your own means. And so I'm going to kind of open this up to whoever wants to talk.
Sure, I'll go.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. The slideshow just disappeared though, Abigail. So I think the first question was communities, the communities that I show up for. I am from the mountains on the western slope of Colorado, and from a really big ski family. So I think like one of the groups that I try and show up for is people that work in the outdoor recreation industry, because that's a group of people that my entire family has worked in or in relation to, and the entire economy off of the town that I grew up in is the outdoor recreation center or industry. So I try and show up for other jobs that is a big part of our economy in Colorado. I think the pillar that most inspired me is probably advocacy. I really liked what you were saying about not necessarily like when you're engaged in this, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're fighting. I think a really common word that we use is resistance, but you know, it's not necessarily about that. I think like collaboration and being able to be open to collaboration, even if it's not what you would generally expect, is what can really make this movement a lot stronger. So I definitely resonate with the advocacy piece. What limits me from engaging in climate justice? Well, I'm really lucky because I get to work full time in climate justice, but other than that, definitely just time and money. You know, working a lot. I would love to be able to do more. I just wish that I had more time in my day. But I try and get around that by, you know, finding opportunities to engage that kind of have like dual opportunities in my life. So if, you know, have like a socialization piece, or are like opportunities where I can get outside, and so trying to kind of combine things so that way I have to do less things every day. So yeah.
Mary, do you have any? And thank you for sharing that, Julia, because that actually is something that I also do too. I'm always combining opportunities because I find it's easier that way, and that's why intersectionality is so important when it comes to climate justice.
Mm-hmm.
Mary, do you have anything?
Well, I would just say that I'm on the Front Range of Colorado, south in the Pikes Peak region. And so I've also worked for the military, the Army at Fort Carson for 30 some odd years, and recently retired. So regardless, I worked for them enough that I still feel like I kind of represent that group as we talk about these things. The military is very aware of and concerned about climate change and doing a lot around sustainability and energy, renewable energy and so forth. So the community that I'm in, being the Pikes Peak region, the military, I also sit on a board of a group called Peak Alliance for a Sustainable Future. Mm-hmm. And we are the stewards, if you will, of a regional plan that was created in 2012 around our future by 2030. So it included things like converting to renewable energy, and addressed our built natural environment and agriculture and any number of things. So anyway, we advocate, if you will, and educate around the plan and the basics of sustainability. As which pillar most inspires me, I guess they all do to some degree. They all are so integrated, it's hard to separate them really for me. But as I said, I do volunteer for Peak Alliance for a Sustainable Future, and I guess that would be education and direct service volunteering. Don't really have any limits for engaging in climate justice other than the community itself is a little conservative in terms of climate and what we need to do about it. So you have to be careful about how you're engaging with people.
Yeah.
And then ways to access opportunities, as I said, with the Peak Alliance. And I'm also involved in another group in our region, the Fountain Creek Watershed District, that looks at stormwater and sedimentation, erosion, and so forth along Fountain Creek. So I think there's plenty of opportunities to be involved in the community, and it's just a matter of taking advantage of them.
Oh, thank you for sharing. I actually don't know too much about the military and their approach to climate justice and sustainability, and that is actually really informative input. It's really interesting. So thank you for all you volunteer for. And so finally, I'm going to move on to the brainstorm piece here. So let's brainstorm, share. What ideas do you have to become involved? And clearly, I think both attendees right now are quite involved. So, I might skip over that question, asking you that question, but what social justice issues would you most like to address with climate justice? And I participate a lot with volunteers from many different sectors. And what I notice is that sometimes there are people who volunteer and they've been volunteering for so long, or they just join something and tag along because they want to volunteer, but they don't really feel completely like they're getting what they want out of it, which is why I asked this question. And if you have either of you have input, I would be glad to hear it. If you don't, that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's something that I thought that point that you brought, Mary, about the place that you're in also being a limit and kind of trying to wiggle around and being approachable to people in conservative areas as well was super valid. So thank you for bringing that up, because that's also something that I've had to deal with. I'm living on the Western Slope and stuff like that. Not necessarily the town that I grew up in, but pretty much the whole western part of the state is pretty rural and pretty conservative. And so I thank you for reminding me about that. Ideas that I have to become involved. Right now, pretty much my entire life is focused on Proposition 112. And I think that's a huge climate justice issue just because of the direct impact of fracking on communities, and especially marginalized communities, and the pollution. And so that's kind of the main way that I'm really striving to become more, to work in climate justice right now. In the future, after the elections are over, something that I would like to do more of is more of just volunteering to help people meet their basic needs so that they can become more involved in advocating for themselves. That's one piece that I've started to realize a lot through working with 350 Colorado, is that not everybody is as lucky as we are to be able to have like the socioeconomic status to volunteer and to advocate. And sometimes to be able to really solve more rooted environmental and climate justice problems in a community, you have to help people meet their basic needs, for food, housing, water, all of that kind of stuff. So moving forward in the future, I'd like to work on more programs to support other communities, rather than just trying to get them to engage in our campaigns, and kind of identifying how we can be better about that. So I think kind of some of those, that ties into some of the social justice issues that I'd like to address with climate change, is the socioeconomic piece of it. And like income inequality, I think would be a big one as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. That's great. I definitely, even from my own background, I remember um, leading a group of people down to Baltimore in college and seeing, it was to help rebuild townhomes after Hurricane Sandy. And I remember just seeing, we broke into this townhome, and I was telling one of my friends this the other day about opening. We had to go back to the stoop on the second floor, the second story, break open the door of this townhome from like 1890 that was boarded up, and there on the landing of the staircase from in the basement, which was flooded and like full of mold, we heard someone running out of the building, and there was a blanket, a baby blanket, baby toys, and needles right next to it. And a mother had fled this landing, which was pretty much the only stable place for you to stand in this building. And she had fled, and it was right above the water, and there was bugs, and she had a child with her, and we had heard her flee and the child's cry. And I'll never forget that moment. I mean, it was a neighborhood that had a lot of people of color in it, and it was not receiving much funding at all from the city of Baltimore. And the intersectionality of how that really affected people living in that neighborhood will always be stuck with me. So I definitely agree with you on that issue, Julia. Mary, any ideas on this?
No, probably. Ideas to become involved. I feel like I've
you're already
accomplished that. So I'm not sure. I mean, there's always more opportunity for writing letters and contacting elected officials and writing editorials and sending them to local newspapers or so forth. So there's always that. One thing, Julia, when I was talking about the conservative area and you brought that up, it's kind of like you just don't use the term climate change or climate justice. You just focus on certain aspects that relate to it. That's how I've noticed that it works. So when I'm talking to folks who are interested in saving money and creating businesses, you know, I'm focused on energy or some aspect that relates to climate.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just agreeing with you.
Yeah. Okay. As far as social justice, around this community, we've been trying to close a power plant, coal-fired power plant owned by our local utility. And associated with that are of course, health issues. I have a daughter who has or actually a granddaughter who has asthma. And so that's a area of social concern, the health aspects.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I don't blame you at any point for thinking about those things too, especially for, you know, there's this phrase that we've been using a lot, I think, in these webinars, and it's been that we're borrowing the earth from our children and grandchildren. And I agree with that. And I also actually come from, I mean, my family being quite rural, I mean, I've grown up in conservative culture my entire life, especially because I'm from the Midwest. And I think you're right when it comes to discussing it and not using some coin phrases, as a lot of people would call it, in the Midwest or the South, or and I think that people are concerned about different areas of it, and they just don't know necessarily how to address it. And we are lucky in Colorado because we have the platform to discuss it. But, you know, how do you go about talking to family members and friends about that? And for me, I do have, a lot of friends who want to know more about the issue, but they don't know how to address it because they don't necessarily know exactly what the issue is or how to put it into words. And again, addressing different sectors in terms of like energy, or most people want to save money on heating or air conditioning, and talking about solar panels, and ideas to create more proficient housing in order to save energy and save on bills. And I mean, it is always something that people are talking about. I think that you just have to know in terms to what area and what population, maybe living in the Springs, how to address it. And it seems like you've been able to do that, Mary. So thank you. And for just bringing up that topic, because I don't think we've hit that actually in these webinars.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So now for the plan of action. And I'm not necessarily listing, I have a couple of points here that I kind of want you to think about. It's not really kind of instruction on how to create a plan of action, but in order to create a plan of action, these are a lot of questions that you need to think about in order to get the ball rolling. And so I'm going to mute the audience for just a second. Okay. And, oh my goodness, sorry. Part one for the plan of action then is, what are your goals? So again, talking about social justice issues or certain sectors that you're interested in, maybe Native American rights or disability rights, again, regarding the heat intolerance, and what audience do you want to reach? So are you more interested in talking about, I think we're all interested in finding better policies to address climate change responsibly. And I think obviously that's what drives us to these webinars, what drives us to take part in climate justice. But in terms of the audiences that you want to reach, are you trying to reach elected officials? Are you trying to reach people within your community who need more education on this? Do you live, in a rural community where people, like the community where I spent most of my time growing up in the UP or Upper Peninsula, Michigan? How do I tell other people about climate justice while educating them on the issue and not trying to be divisive? I am trying to be inclusive and telling people how it impacts us in terms of our bills, our health, our drinking water, especially in Michigan. Two, share your story. And I have stressed this in every webinar because this is the only way that I have found myself able to connect with others and feel truly genuine to my own self, because my truth is my truth. And your truth is your truth. And maybe you can cite a research study, but if you don't also have that emotion in there, people will not be as drawn to you. And sharing your story, and maybe the one about Baltimore, I really hope that draws people in to kind of how much this issue really affects people from all different walks of life. And it really shook me seeing that, and it still is very fresh in my mind. And let's see, part 3 here. So I want everyone to kind of think of 3 goals that you would like to accomplish. 1 large goal and then 2 small goals. The scale of these goals is kind of relative to maybe how much you participate in climate justice in your community. So, say I'm just starting out and I want to create 1 large goal. That could be maybe telling 10 community members that are not within my circle of friends or family about projects or issues that are related to climate change. And that could also be very helpful in a conservative community because it draws attention to issues that are related, but you're not necessarily throwing in words like climate change and climate justice. But it definitely garners more interest from people who, are trying to figure out how to address these daily struggles they have regarding, the environment. And then maybe in addition to that example, for the large goal, I would have 2 small ones. And maybe that would be talking to 3 friends about it and then talking to 3 family members about it. So how will you reach these goals? And in the third webinar, I kind of talked about SMART goals. The second webinar, my bad. But SMART goals is a professional means to kind of list out goals and objectives you want to obtain and how you're going to obtain those goals by kind of structuring them a little bit more and understanding the process of how you're going to achieve what you want to achieve. And then I also have here in bullet points some examples of goals you can set for yourself. One of them is creating an event. An example of that would be maybe inviting your neighbors to do a neighborhood yard sale or a community yard sale. It's sustainable, and then you can also use some of the donations or some of the profits to donate to a local nonprofit. Then a second one that I have is starting a fundraiser. So you could start on Facebook, and I know a lot of people have the Facebook fundraisers for their birthdays, and I think that that is a great way to select a nonprofit, draw attention to it on social media, and then also draw in donations for people who get excited about it, because it is something that's exciting when they find out about an issue that, again, they just don't have the means to be educated about. It really, and they're like, wow, that actually like really does impact me a lot. And I realize now that it is, an environmental issue, and I would really like to see that nonprofit get somewhere. People will donate. Another example I have is just, again, talking to 5 family members or friends. Another one is writing a letter to the editor of a local newspaper and drawing attention to the community about the concerns you have. And then finally, contacting, of course, your elected officials during this election season. But most importantly, we all know, is voting. A fourth point that I have in regards to plan of action is just to remind you, especially if you're just watching this or following the PowerPoint, that the ask is the win. Asking other people if they know about this issue is accomplishing a big feat that you don't really have to go beyond. And even if you're just asking a family member to participate in something, if they say no, they might say no, but you're still putting yourself out there. You overcame that fear of asking. And I think that is an emotional barrier a lot of people who are interested in volunteering, but kind of have when they want to participate, they struggle with. 5, so stay within reach. And again, don't push yourself, or don't push yourself beyond your own feelings of, safety. But don't be afraid to push yourself just a little bit beyond what you're used to. So this means, you don't have to buy like a banner to put in your front yard and put along your fence, and it's like $150 to put up there, and you've spent that much money on it, and people talk to you about it, which would be great. I mean, I don't discourage it, but if it's not within your own means of money, you don't have to do that. Again, don't be afraid to push yourself to do something like that. And just make sure that you don't push your budget, but also maintain connection to the community by connecting with a group or a nonprofit that you can volunteer with. And again, I was talking about regularly volunteering earlier, and this could be, I think that 350 Colorado, a nonprofit that I volunteered with this summer, has a lot of neighborhood sections or city like sections in Colorado. So there's 350 Colorado Denver, and just regularly attending meetings is a great way to, participate. And then finally, please respond to the survey. I have a survey that I'm going to be sending out after this, and I will send it within a week. I just want to make sure that people who see this feel like they are on the path to thinking about goals, creating goals, or even achieving some goals. And I kind of want to just measure where you are at in terms of approaching taking action within your community after you have seen or attended some of the webinars that I have hosted through this series. And finally, again, don't forget to vote this election season. Please do some research, support Proposition 112, and I haven't really plugged that yet, but I'm going to today because it is an important and historical proposition that Colorado is kind of spearheading in terms of fracking. And please don't be afraid to vote on this issue. And you can pledge to vote yes on the website, corising.org/pledge to vote yes. Again, that's corising.org/pledge to vote yes. So where to begin? 350 Colorado is an organization that I just mentioned. And the mission of 350 Colorado is to work locally to help build the global grassroots movement to solve the climate crisis and transition to a sustainable future. 350 Colorado has established itself as the largest Colorado-based grassroots network focused on taking action to stop climate change. They work to empower local communities with the tools and connections to create measurable change towards a sustainable future. You can add them on social media. I have a link to their Facebook page here, facebook.com/350 Colorado, or you can volunteer and find event opportunities on their website, 350colorado.org/volunteer. And I always forget to add the 350 in the second link, but 350colorado.org/calendar. Another great place to begin is the Colorado People's Climate Justice Platform, which is a growing initiative to positively impact urgent climate policy related issues within the state of Colorado. And over 66 Colorado groups have joined this coalition and endorsed the initiative. To learn more and volunteer, please look at peoplesplatform.info/take-action. And then I also have included a list of other nonprofits who have supported the People's Platform. And actually, Mary, because you mentioned Peak Alliance for a Sustainable Future, I added that in here as well. And finally, thank you for your participation. If this is the only webinar you can attend, thank you. And thank you, Mary and Julia today. And whoever's watching this recording, I suggest you look at 350 Colorado's website for the other webinars. And the link that we have for that is 350colorado.org/civic engagement workshops. For questions about this or future events, please email me at abigail@350colorado.org. And I am just going to open this up one more time to any further questions you might have, either of you might have.
Are you going to send the survey to us in an email, Abigail?
I am.
Okay, great. That sounds good. I'm wondering, with the People's Climate Justice Platform, I just wanted to mention to people that we just created an educational guide on the platform. So it's a PDF document that kind of goes through the justifications for why we put all of those different points into the platform for groups and for elected officials to endorse and support. And we are going to be sending it out to all of the candidates that are running again for elections here. So if you have a particular candidate that you want to educate about climate justice issues, definitely encourage you to hop online to the peoplesplatform.info website and check out the educational guide on there, and send it around to any elected officials, candidates, or people that are just interested in learning more about some specifics on climate justice.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you. And again, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you for watching. And I hope to see you at future events.
Thanks, Abigail.
Thanks, Abigail. Bye-bye.
Bye.